Good morning, everybody. Today's parsha that I'm reflecting on is Balak. And Balak means cut off. He was the Moabite king, and he saw that the Israelites were very numerous, so he wanted to curse them. And what's very interesting is there is archaeological evidence of people whose profession it was to curse. And apparently, I have a friend whose grandmother did that. She would write down curses if there was somebody who needed to be cursed. And there's even evidence that there was a Bilam. But who was this Bilam? Was he a diviner? Was he a charlatan? Was he the real deal or a prophet? The story kind of leaves me wondering. And his name means curse a people. So right away, you've got a very strong indication of these characters. So first, Bilam declines the job because in a dream, God comes to him and says, no, don't do it. And then he keeps getting offered more and more. And he's really a bit shifty because he's like, well, God could change God's mind. Let's see. God doesn't change God's mind, but God says, all right, go ahead. But you can only say the words that I put in your mouth. And it's just blessings. So he goes out early in the morning and he saddles his donkey. Now, this is a strange thing because he's very wealthy. He's got servants. He doesn't need to do it. But the rabbis say he got up early because he was so anxious to curse the people. So it's like again, another shifty thing. But what I was excited about and interested in was the donkey. So a couple of years ago, Rabbi Ellen turned me on to this book, The Mouth of the Donkey. So here's some interesting things about donkeys. So human beings have obligations towards donkeys. If you own a working donkey in Deuteronomy and Exodus, it says you have to let it rest for Shabbos. And you cannot force it to keep up with a gigantic ox. And if you see a neighbor overworking their donkey, you're obliged to step in. And when you see a donkey struggling under its load, you have to help it directly, even if you hate its owner. That's in Exodus. And if you help your enemy's donkey, rabbinic commentators add, you pave the way for peace, friendship, and community. So donkeys are certainly mentioned quite frequently in the Torah and in many stories throughout other cultures. And they tend to be depicted as a spiritual guide. And on a real level, donkeys are really smart. And once they learn something, they have it. And if they're with an inexperienced rider, they will still do what they know is the right thing to do. And that's really important to this story. Now, on a more mystical level, the Talmud says that God created the world in the 6 days, but just before Shabbos came, and God then had Shabbos, you can't work, can't create, but just on the cusp, Shabbos Eve, God created the mouth of the donkey. And it is in this story that the donkey speaks. And the donkey only speaks in this parsha. The other thing about equines in general is they're sensitive to touch. And in this story, Bilam has some physical connection with the donkey that wasn't nice. And I'll get to that soon. The other thing about donkeys is they're very sure-footed and strong. And the other thing is they're very loyal. And that comes into the story as well. So he gets up on his donkey and he's riding, and all of a sudden the donkey stops because the donkey sees an angel with a sword in her hand. And Balaam says, going. The donkey just won't go because it's like, hey, there's an angel here with a sword, you know? And he gets really angry and he says, if I had a, he's beating this poor donkey. And he says, if I had a sword, I'd kill you with it. It's like, whoa. So then in Numbers chapter 22, verse 30, the donkey opens her mouth and she says, aren't I the donkey that you've ridden since you first started? Do I normally do this? And then, Karen, if you could cue the picture, then God opened Balaam's eyes and he saw the angel put the sword in his or her hand. It was like, whoa. Now, here the rabbis say that if humans were blessed with the vision of seeing angels, they'd go nuts, but animals can. So in this instance, God opened the mouth of the donkey to say this. Now, that's pretty cool, but what's even more interesting is in the Hebrew, in this sentence, aren't I your donkey? She says, Anochi. Now, where have we heard Anochi before? In the Ten Commandments. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. So this indicates that God's essence is coming through the donkey. And God opened her mouth only this one occasion, and then soon after, she died. And the other thing about the humility of this donkey is that she's, like all servants, very observant and does what her master tells her to do. And in the human world, if you think about Downton Abbey, for example, they watch every movement that their bosses or whatever, their people they're taking care of, they're watching every movement that they make so that they can respond. And this reminds me of my Tante Nettie, who I dedicate this teaching to, because I don't remember ever seeing her stand. And she was a very old lady, but she was always standing. And we would be gathered in a circle, all the family, and we'd be chatting away. And she would just stand there, and I'd hear her wheezing, this asthmatic wheeze. And she would just be watching, and she said, you want something to drink? You want maybe a little something to eat? Here, you want some nuts? I mean, she's always looking to serve. And a good servant, that's what they do. They care. And the other thing about servants is they, in Downton, the kids come to the servant, not to their parents, for advice and for comfort. And you think of movies and literature, it's always the servants that people come to for guidance. So to me, this donkey raises awareness of appreciating the humility of the servants and of the, you think of your cashiers and the orderly who's cleaning up the blood and the night nurse who's looking after your loved one in the hospital. So that's really what the takeaway from this. But of course, I'm very dedicated to the top 10 of the Torah. And the blessing that comes out of Bil'am is Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. How beautiful your dwelling places, Israel. And Ohalecha, Ohel is a tent. That's where people live. But Mishkenotecha, Mishkan, the Mishkan is the holy tabernacle. So there's one thing to live, but another thing to dwell in the presence of the Holy One, which is where that's what the purpose of the Mishkan is. And I wonder, does Bilham himself become a God wrestler, which Yisrael means God wrestling? And is his mouth perhaps opened by God to declare the truth? And then this connects with the prayer that we say before we chant the Amidah. God, open up my mouth so that I may declare your praises. We're asking God to speak through us too, just like God spoke through the donkey. Divarti.